The monitor flatlined. Asystole. For 17 seconds, Seoul's most feared crime lord was clinically dead. The only person in the room was a trauma nurse he'd never met, and as she brought him back, she leaned close and whispered a single name into his ear, the man who had just poisoned him. His name was Park Min-yu. He didn't run gangs. He ran an empire built on extortion, luxury real estate, and silent partnerships that reached into City Hall. And the nurse who saved him, Annika, wasn't just a caregiver. She was a weapon, placed at his bedside by the one person he trusted absolutely. This is how a single whisper dismantled a criminal dynasty from the inside out. To understand how a whisper could break an empire, you need to understand the empire itself. Park Min-yu didn't claw his way up. He was born into it. The Park family had controlled the docks of Incheon for 3 generations, moving from smuggling to real estate to silent ownership in half the nightclubs in Gangnam. By the time Min-yu took over at 35, after his father's sudden heart attack, he had transformed brute force racketeering into a corporate structure. There were subsidiaries, offshore accounts, and lawyers who never saw the blood. He was called the CEO of crime, and his right hand, his confidant, his younger brother by 2 years, was June. June was the opposite. Where Min-yu was silent and imposing, June was charismatic, the public face. He handled the club investments, the politician schmoozing the press. He was the brother you wanted to have a drink with. And for 15 years, the system worked. Min-yu ruled from the shadows, June smoothed the path in the light. But the balance began to fracture over a single deal, the Dragon River Casino project in Macau. Min-yu vetoed it. Too high profile, too much Chinese triad attention. June had already promised associates, invested preliminary funds. He saw it as the family's future. Min-yu saw it as a death sentence. In the sterile conference room of their legitimate flagship company, Park Holdings, June argued for an hour. Min-yu listened, then spoke 4 words. The answer is no. The humiliation was public in front of 6 captains. That was the crack, and a crack is all a careful man needs. Now meet the nurse. Annika Carter, 29, from Atlanta, top of her class at Emory University's nursing school, specializing in trauma and emergency care. She worked the ER at Grady Memorial, one of the busiest trauma centers in the country. She saw gunshot wounds, stabbings, car wrecks. She was brilliant under pressure, and she was drowning in $80,000 of student debt, with a mother needing specialized multiple sclerosis care that insurance wouldn't touch. Annika was trapped. And trapped people are the most predictable chess pieces. June found her through a medical staffing agency that didn't ask too many questions. The offer was absurd: a 1-year private contract, a single patient in Seoul, a salary of $300,000 clear plus a bonus upon completion, all debts paid. It was a fairy tale with a rotten core. The patient was described as a reclusive billionaire with a heart condition, needing discreet, round-the-clock monitoring. The agency stressed discretion. Sign a comprehensive NDA. June met her once in a hotel lounge in New York. He was polished, apologetic for the secrecy. My brother values his privacy above all. Your medical skill is what we need. Just do your job and you walk away set for life. Annika arrived in Seoul on a rainy Tuesday in March. She was installed in a luxury apartment overlooking the Han River, a stone's throw from the VIP wing of Seoul National University Hospital, where her patient maintained a permanent private suite. She didn't meet Min-yu for a week. Her job, initially, was to review his complex medical history, coordinate with his wary, aging personal physician, and establish a baseline. The files showed a man in his mid-40s, physically fit but with a recent, unexplained arrhythmia. The charts were meticulous, yet Annika, with her ER eyes, saw gaps. Episodes of weakness, dizziness, all dismissed as stress. But the toxicology screens were always clean. Too clean. When she finally met him, he was in his hospital suite's office, wearing a tailored suit, reviewing a construction blueprint. He barely glanced up. "You're the new nurse. Don't bother me unless I'm dying." He was a wall of cold intensity. But over the next month, a fragile professional rhythm formed. Min-yu would work relentlessly, ignoring his body until it betrayed him, a spike in blood pressure, a dizzy spell. Annika would intervene with a quiet efficiency he grudgingly respected. She never flinched at the armed men outside the door, the hushed phone calls about collections, the palpable fear visitors brought into the room. She was just the nurse. Meanwhile, June was her only real point of contact. He'd check in, always friendly, always asking detailed questions about Minu's health, his moods, his schedule. Is he taking his medication? Does he seem more tired than usual? Did he mention any pain here? He framed it as brotherly concern. Annika, trained to observe, started to feel a chill. The questions weren't about wellness. They were about vulnerability. The first direct test came 6 weeks in. Minu had a brutal week of meetings. Annika noticed his lips had a slight bluish tint, a sign of potential oxygenation issues his old doctor had missed. She insisted on a new, full cardiac workup. Minu refused. June called Annika that evening. He's stubborn, but you're right. He needs that test for his own good. He paused. His personal physician is old school. Let's use a different clinic. I'll set it up. Discreetly. The clinic June chose was not on the hospital's affiliated list. It was private, anonymous. The results came back showing alarming, previously undetected signs of cardiac strain. It justified Annika's increased vigilance. It also established June as the brother who cared, and subtly removed Minu from his trusted medical circle. The poison wasn't a dramatic, fast-acting toxin. That would raise alarms. According to the medical timeline Annika would later reconstruct, it was a slow, cumulative agent, likely introduced through a daily supplement June had recommended months earlier for stress and heart health. It mimicked natural cardiac decay. It was elegant, and it required a specific trigger to push the heart into failure. That trigger was a heated board meeting at Park Holdings. Minu, against June's very public pleading, shut down another of June's pet projects, this time a merger with a questionable Russian logistics firm. The argument was volcanic. In front of the entire board, Minu said, "You have the ambition of a king and the foresight of a child. You will get us all killed." June left the room white-faced. That night, Minu collapsed in his penthouse. The ambulance rushed him to his private suite. Annika was waiting. His heart rhythm was chaotic, deteriorating fast. She worked with cold precision, administering drugs, stabilizing him. June arrived, distraught, barking orders at everyone. He pulled Annika aside, his hand gripping her arm too tight. "You have to save him. You understand. Everything depends on it." His eyes were wide, but not with fear for his brother, with fear for the plan. For 3 days, Minu hovered. June was a constant presence, controlling access, filtering information. Annika noticed he always made sure to be the one to bring Minu's water to adjust his pillows. On the 4th morning, she came in early and found June already there, leaning over the bed, his back to her. Minu was asleep. She saw June's hand near the intravenous line, a small, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist near the injection port. He turned, saw her, and smiled. Just checking the drip rate. The chill in Annika's spine turned to ice. Later that day, Minu's condition crashed. The monitor screamed. Flatline, asystole. The code blue team surged in, but June, in a masterstroke of performative grief, held them back at the door for critical seconds, shouting, "Let her work, she knows him best," creating the exact isolation he needed. Annika was alone with a dead man. She began CPR, her mind racing. She'd seen the flick of the wrist. She knew the slow poison needed a final push. And as the epinephrine surged into his system and his heart gave a feeble shudder, she leaned down, her lips inches from his ear. In that moment, she wasn't June's pawn. She was a woman who signed up to save a life, not to watch one be stolen. And she whispered the name she now knew was true. June. In the delirium of returning consciousness, Park Minu's eyes flickered open, clouded with drugs and near death. They locked onto Annika's. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But in that raw, unfiltered state, the truth was absorbed not as sound, but as primal fact. The man who poisoned him was his brother. The nurse who saved him knew it. And when June burst back into the room, all tearful relief, Minu looked at him. And for the first time in his life, the CEO of crime saw not his brother, but a stranger. The silence in that hospital room was thicker than the drugs in Minu's veins. He looked at his weeping brother, June, and saw the performance for the first time. The too loud concern, the hands that clutched a little too tightly. Minu, the man who built an empire on reading lies, had just been given the truth in a whisper, and now he had to pretend he hadn't heard it. He closed his eyes, feigning exhaustion. "Leave me," he rasped, his voice a shadow of its usual command. June protested, but Minu waved a weak hand. "Just the nurse. Go." The dismissal was a test. Would June fight to stay to control the narrative? He hesitated, then forced a smile, patting Annika's shoulder. "Take good care of him." The touch made her flinch. The door clicked shut. For a full minute, Minu lay still, listening to the retreating footsteps. Then his eyes opened. The cloudiness was gone, replaced by a glacial focus. He looked at Annika, who stood frozen by the monitor. "You said a name," he stated, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a question. Annika's training kicked in. Deny, deflect, protect yourself. But the look in his eyes stripped all that away. This was not a patient. This was a predator, wounded and infinitely more dangerous. "I observed a potential contaminant event at your intravenous line," she said, her voice clinical. "I voiced my suspicion to ensure auditory stimulus during resuscitation." A perfect medical cover story. Minu's lips twitched in something that wasn't a smile. "You're a bad liar, nurse." "Good. I hate good liars. I'm surrounded by them." He tried to sit up, grimaced, and fell back. The weakness was real. The poison was still in him. "June," he repeated the name she'd whispered. "Why?" Here was the precipice. She could fall back on the contract, on June's threats, on her debt. She thought of her mother, but she also thought of the flick of June's wrist over the IV port. She had entered a room where a murder was in progress. "Your brother hired me. The contract, the debts, it was all to place me here. My job was never just to care for you. It was to monitor you, to report on your vulnerabilities, and to be here at the right moment when your heart finally gave out." Minu absorbed this, his face a mask, and the whisper. "A deviation from the plan," Annika said softly. "I'm a nurse. I save lives. I don't watch them be taken." A long, terrible silence stretched out. The only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor, the machine that had just screamed his death sentence minutes before. "Prove it," Minu said finally. That began the silent war. Minu, the CEO of crime, was now a prisoner in his own hospital bed, surrounded by staff whose loyalty he could no longer gauge. June controlled the perimeter, the guards, the information flow. But Minu had two weapons, his decades of cunning and the nurse who had chosen a side. The first move was information gathering. Minu demanded his personal phone, a secure satellite device. June brought it, cheerful, oblivious. "Catching up on work already? You should rest." The moment he left, Minu, with trembling hands, typed a series of codes. He wasn't reading emails. He was accessing a hidden server, an insurance policy he'd never thought he'd need. It contained mirrored financials, voice memo backups from key meetings, and most critically, the access logs for his penthouse and this very hospital suite. Annika's role became one of distraction. She would engage June in lengthy, detailed medical updates at the door, giving Minu precious minutes to scroll. She started noting every visitor, every medication delivery, the exact timing of June's appearances. She became Minu's eyes and ears. What they found in those first 48 hours was a pattern of subtle sabotage. The access logs showed June's keycard entering the penthouse pharmacy at 2 in the morning, a week before Minu's first major arrhythmia. The financials showed a series of large, untraceable withdrawals from a shell company June managed, payments made to a biomedical research firm in Prague with no public profile. Minu traced the firm through an old contact in Interpol. Its specialty: pharmacological research, with a sideline in undetectable cardiac toxins. The most damning evidence, however, was in Minu's own body. He ordered Annika to run a new, comprehensive toxicology panel, but she couldn't use the hospital lab. June had allies there. Instead, she drew blood using supplies from an unrelated crash cart, labeled it with a fake patient ID, and had it sent to an independent lab in Busan, paid for with cash from Minu's hidden safe. The results came back in a plain envelope. Traces of a synthetic compound called diglycoside olendrin, a derivative of the oleander plant. In tiny, cumulative doses, it mimics heart disease. In one large dose, it causes immediate cardiac arrest. It was perfect, and it explained the supplements June had been so insistently providing. But proof was one thing, survival was another. June was growing suspicious. Minu's recovery was slower than expected because Annika was secretly administering a chelating agent to bind the toxin, a process that caused its own fatigue. June noticed the lack of progress. He started questioning Annika's competence. He suggested bringing in a specialist from Switzerland, a doctor he'd vetted. It was a move to remove her. Annika knew it. Minu knew it. If she left the room, Minu was dead within a day. They had to accelerate the plan. Minu decided to bait the trap. He called a meeting in his hospital room, just him, June, and his most trusted captain, a grizzled old man named Siak who had served his father. Siak was old school, fiercely loyal to the family, not necessarily to Minu. He was the perfect witness. Minu, propped up on pillows, looked frail. He spoke in a wavering voice. "June, the doctors are not optimistic. The strain. It may be time to discuss succession." June's face was a masterpiece of conflicted emotion. "Don't talk like that. You'll beat this." "Be realistic," Minu coughed. "The Dragon River deal in Macau. You were right, it's the future. I was too cautious. When I'm gone, you should proceed. Siak, you'll support him." Siak, uncomfortable, nodded. "Of course, boss." June's eyes gleamed with a hunger he couldn't fully hide. It was the validation he'd craved for years. "I won't let you down, brother. I'll make the family stronger than ever." "Good," Minu whispered. "There is just one complication." He paused, letting the room hang. "My will. It leaves controlling interest to my daughter, Sumin. She's only 19. You would be her regent, of course, until she turns 25. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. June's smile froze. Sumin was Minu's child from a brief, secret relationship, hidden away in Switzerland at a boarding school. She was his greatest vulnerability and his ultimate insurance. June knew of her but never considered her a threat. A regency, 5 years of power but not ownership. After which, he'd hand everything back to a girl who might dismiss him entirely. It was unacceptable. I didn't know that was your wish," June said carefully. "It is. You understand, don't you? Blood must inherit blood." Minu was watching him like a hawk, seeing the calculation flicker behind June's eyes. The brotherly mask was slipping, revealing the furious architect beneath. The meeting ended. June left, his mind racing. Siak lingered, troubled. "Boss, is this wise? June has many friends now." "Thank you, Siak. Watch him for me," Minu said, sealing the old captain's loyalty by acknowledging the unspoken truth. That night the surveillance escalated. Annika, taking a late shift, noticed a new, tiny black dot near the air vent, a pinhole camera not part of the hospital's system. June was no longer just watching the door. He was watching the bed. They were now under direct observation. Annika, under the guise of adjusting Minu's blanket, leaned close, her back to the camera. "He's watching," she breathed. "I know," Minu murmured, his lips barely moving. "We need the source, the physical poison, find it." It was an impossible task. Search June's office. His home, he was too careful. But Annika remembered the clinic, the private, anonymous clinic June had used for the cardiac workup. The one that had provided the alarming results that justified her presence. If June had a medical accomplice, it would be there. She used her day off. The clinic was in a sleek, nondescript building in Apgujeong. She posed as a researcher from SNU Hospital doing a follow-up on a referral. The receptionist was wary. Annika's accent, her insistence, raised flags. She left empty-handed, certain she'd triggered an alarm. She was right. 2 hours later, back at her apartment, her phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message. "You're asking the wrong questions in the wrong places. Remember your mother in Atlanta. The care facility is so peaceful. Would be a shame if her funding was withdrawn." The threat was explicit. A picture followed, taken that very day, showing her mother's assisted living facility in Decatur. June wasn't just a criminal in soul. His reach was long, and he had done his homework on his pawn. Annika sat in the dark, clutching her phone, terror washing over her. She was in a box. Betray Minu and she was complicit in murder. Continue to help him and her mother paid the price. There was no way out. She went to Minu the next morning, her face drawn. She showed him the text. He read it, his expression darkening. For a long time he said nothing, staring at the photo of the quiet Georgia facility. Then he did something unexpected. He picked up his secure phone and made a call. He spoke in low, rapid Korean. Annika caught only a few words. "Decatur, 24/7, no expense." He hung up and looked at her. "2 of my men are on a plane to Atlanta. They will be outside your mother's facility within 18 hours. They will watch. They are very good at watching. If anyone so much as looks at her wrong, they will intervene. Your mother is now under my protection." It was a monstrous kindness. He had just tied her fate to his irrevocably, but he had also given her the one thing she needed, a reason to fight. The fear for her mother morphed into a cold, sharp rage. With renewed desperation, she turned her focus inward. The poison had to be administered daily. How? June wasn't there all day. He had to have an accomplice inside the medical staff. She began a silent audit of every person who touched Minu's medication. The floor nurse, the orderly, the nutritionist who brought his specially prepared meals. Her break came from the trash. Hospital protocol dictated the disposal of IV bags and tubing in specific biohazard bins. Annika started checking the bins in the supply room after each shift change. 3 days after the threat, she found it. A discarded 500-milliliter saline bag, empty, with a puncture mark not from the standard IV spike, but from a much finer gauge needle, a syringe injection. The bag had been used for Minu's overnight hydration. Someone had injected something into the line after it left the pharmacy. She took the bag, sealed it in a clean specimen container. This was the source. It needed to be tested, but getting it to a lab now was impossible. June's surveillance was airtight. They had the evidence, but it was trapped in the room with them. Minu saw the container, understood immediately. "We need to get that out." "There's no way," Annika said. "They're watching every exit." Minu smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "Then we don't use an exit." He had another call made, this time to a different kind of specialist. That evening, a window washer's platform ascended the side of the high-rise hospital. At a prearranged time, Annika, during a staged distraction where she accidentally set off a bed alarm, moved to the window, unlocked it, and placed the specimen container in a magnetic case on the platform's rail. The platform descended into the night, evidence vanishing into the Seoul skyline. The test confirmed it. The saline was laced with a concentrated dose of diglycoside olendrin. It was the smoking gun. They now had proof of the method. But having proof and being able to use it are different things. June was the public face of the parks. Minu was a reclusive, ailing crime lord. Exposing June would expose the entire empire. It would be mutually assured destruction. Minu knew he had to strike not at the brother, but at the brother's power base. He needed to strip June of his allies, his legitimacy, before he could confront him. And he had to do it from a hospital bed, with a heart weakened by poison and a nurse as his only soldier. He gave Annika her most dangerous mission yet. June's strength is his network, the politicians, the bankers, the club owners. He has files on them all, compromising material, debts, secrets. He keeps it all in a private server, separate from the family system. He calls it his insurance. Find it. How? Annika asked, bewildered. He brings his tablet here to work. He thinks I'm too sick to notice. he uses a biometric login, his thumbprint. The plan was audacious, terrifying. The next time June visited, Annika was to engineer a minor medical emergency, a simulated allergic reaction, something that would require his immediate help, his physical contact. In the chaos, she would capture his thumbprint. The day arrived. June came, his tablet in hand. He was in a good mood, talking about a new club acquisition. Annika's heart hammered against her ribs. She waited for her moment. As she moved to check Minu's IV, she tripped, knocking a tray of surgical instruments clattering to the floor. As June instinctively reached out to steady her, she grabbed his wrist, her other hand pressing a prepared, clear adhesive film against his thumb. "Sorry, clumsy," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with real terror. June pulled his hand back, annoyed. He looked at his thumb, then at her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Did he see it? The calculation, the fear. He wiped his thumb on his trousers, a casual gesture, and turned back to his brother, dismissing her. But in her palm, folded into a piece of gauze, was the adhesive strip, bearing a perfect replica of June's thumbprint, the key to his kingdom. The bridge into Act 2B is where the silent war goes hot. The story transitions from gathering proof to launching the attack, with Annika moving from the hospital room into the digital heart of June's empire, using the stolen key to unravel his network, all while June realizes his pawn is no longer under his control and prepares his final, violent move to secure his legacy before his brother can expose him. The thumbprint was a ghost key. It opened a door to a world Annika was never meant to see. Using a secure terminal in the hospital's administrative wing, she accessed June's private server. What she found there wasn't just blackmail material on politicians. It was a blueprint for a coup that had begun not months, but years earlier. And she and Minu weren't the only targets. The server was organized with cold, corporate precision. Folders labeled by date, by project, by individual. She found the Macau casino files, showing June had already pledged shares to a Hong Kong triad as collateral, a move that would have started a war Minu had rightly feared. She found dossiers on every captain in the organization, rating their loyalty to Minu versus their price. But the deepest folder was simply titled Legacy. Inside were medical records, not just Minu's, their fathers. Park Sr. had died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. The official autopsy was clean, but June's server contained a private toxicology report commissioned from the same Prague firm, showing trace markers of olendrin. Minu's father hadn't died naturally. He had been June's first test run. Annika felt the ground tilt beneath her. This wasn't just greed. This was a pathology, a systematic elimination of his own bloodline to claim a throne. She downloaded everything, her hands trembling over the keyboard. Back in the hospital room, she showed Minu the files on a secured tablet. He read his father's toxicology report, his face hardening into something inhuman. The grief and rage were so profound they became silence. He had loved his father, feared him, fought with him, but never doubted his death. Now it was all a lie. June had been playing this long game since before Minu even took power. "The doctors said stress," Minu finally whispered, the words ash in his mouth. June was the one who insisted it was stress. He handled everything. The funeral, the will. He trailed off, the implications crashing down. If June had manipulated the father's death, had he also manipulated the succession? Minu's ascension had been smooth, uncontested. Had June cleared the path, only to plan to take it for himself later? This changed the battlefield entirely. June wasn't an impatient younger brother. He was a patient, calculating viper who had been nesting in the family tree for half a decade. With this new lens, Minu re-examined every piece of evidence. The withdrawals to the Prague firm dated back 6 years. The allies June had cultivated in the government were all individuals with known grievances against Minu's father. June hadn't just been building his own network. He'd been methodically recruiting his brother's and father's enemies. The immediate problem was the thumbprint. The server had a security log. June would see the unauthorized access from an unfamiliar terminal inside the hospital. They had maybe hours before he knew he'd been breached. Minyu made a decision. It was time to stop playing defense. "We use what we have," he said, "not to expose him, to divide him." The plan was audacious. Using the compromising material from June's own server, Annika, under Minyu's direction, began sending anonymous, encrypted messages. Not to the authorities, to June's allies. To the politician who was being blackmailed with photos, she sent a message. "Your secret is safe with me, but your partner June's are not. He is compromised. Distance yourself." To the banker June owed a fortune, she sent a screenshot of June's private ledger showing he was planning to default. They turned June's insurance file into weapons of mass distrust. The effect was immediate and chaotic. June's phone began ringing incessantly. He would take calls in the hallway, his voice first placating, then angry, then frantic. His network, his carefully curated web of influence, was unraveling from the inside. He could feel the threads slipping but couldn't see who was cutting them. His suspicion fell inevitably on the only variable in his controlled environment, Annika. He confronted her in the supply room, slamming the door shut. The charming facade was completely gone. His face was a mask of controlled fury. "What did you do?" he hissed, crowding her against a shelf of sanitizer bottles. "I monitored my patient's vitals. I changed his dressings," Annika said, keeping her voice flat, nursing neutral. "You're lying. Something has happened. People are reconsidering their commitments." "Perhaps they've reconsidered your competence," she said, a dangerous edge entering her tone. She was done being afraid of him. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "You listen to me. You are a nothing, a tool I bought. Your mother's life is a line item in my budget. One word from me and that line is redacted. Do you understand?" She yanked her arm free. "I understand that a man who needs to poison his own family isn't as powerful as he thinks. He's just desperate." The words hung in the air, a confession he hadn't made and an accusation she hadn't explicitly stated. It was the first time the silent war had been voiced aloud. June's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. He had his confirmation. The nurse had turned. He left without another word. The next move was his, and it was swift. That afternoon, Minyu's condition suddenly deteriorated. A new doctor, one Annika had never seen, appeared with June and insisted on taking over care. He claimed Minyu was showing signs of sepsis and needed immediate, aggressive treatment and isolation. It was a medical coup. Annika was physically barred from the room by two of June's men. She stood helpless in the hallway, watching through the glass as the new doctor attached new lines to Minyu's IV pole. Minyu, weak but alert, caught her eye. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't fight." He was telling her to retreat. But retreat to where? June owned the hospital perimeter. He owned her apartment. He owned her visa. As she stood there, her phone vibrated. A message from the nursing agency that had placed her. Contract terminated effective immediately for breach of confidentiality. Visa sponsorship revoked. Report to immigration within 48 hours. Checkmate. June was removing her from the board. Without her visa, she was an illegal alien. Without her contract, she had no reason to be in the country, let alone the hospital. Immigration would detain and deport her. Minyu would be left alone, at the mercy of the new doctor and his brother. Panic threatened to choke her. She fled to the only sanctuary she had left, the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational room with dim lights and empty pews. She needed to think. Minyu had men, resources, but he was paralyzed in that bed. She had the evidence, but no way to use it. They were so close to exposing everything, and now she was going to be bundled onto a plane. As she sat there, a figure slid into the pew beside her. It was Captain Siak, the old man from the meeting. He placed a simple flip phone on the bench between them. "The boss said you might need this," he grunted, not looking at her. "He said to tell you, the insurance is in the daughter." Then he stood and walked away, vanishing as quietly as he came. Annika picked up the phone. It had one number pre-programmed. She dialed. A young woman's voice answered in Korean, then switched to perfect, lightly accented English. "This is Soo Min, Minyu's daughter, the heir, the insurance." In their last strategic talk, Minyu had mentioned her only in the context of the will. But now Annika understood. Soo Min wasn't just a beneficiary, she was a contingency plan. Minyu, in his paranoid wisdom, had prepared his daughter. He had given her access to accounts, to legal counsel, to a parallel structure outside of Korea. Annika explained the situation in rushed clinical terms. The poison, the server, the thumbprint, the deportation order. Soo Min listened without interruption. "My father told me this day might come," she said, her voice chillingly calm for a 19-year-old. "He said if I ever got a call from a stranger on a burned phone, I should trust them and activate Protocol White Jade. Do you know what that is?" "I don't," Annika said. "It's a failsafe. It releases a package to a pre-approved list of international financial regulators and news agencies. It contains proof of the Park family's legitimate business holdings being systematically looted by June. It's not about the crimes. It's about the money. It will freeze every asset he's trying to steal." It was brilliant. Minyu knew he couldn't beat June with muscle or street power alone. June had co-opted that. So Minyu had built a financial dead man switch. Exposing the murders would cause a gang war. Exposing the massive international fraud would bring down banks, governments, and Interpol. June's new allies would run for cover. But Soo Min continued, "The protocol requires two keys. My digital signature and a physical token. A USB drive. My father has it." The drive, it was in the hospital room. With Minyu, who was now under the control of June's doctor, they needed to get it out. Time was collapsing. Annika had perhaps a day before immigration came for her. She had to get back into that room. She went to the one person who could grant her access, the chief of staff of the hospital, a stern woman named Dr. Kim. Annika bypassed all protocol, walked into her office and laid out not the criminal conspiracy, but a medical one. She presented the lab results from Busan, showing the Olendrin. She showed the discrepant toxicology reports. "You have a patient being slowly murdered in your VIP wing," Annika stated. "The man currently in charge of his care is not a credentialed cardiologist. He is a fraud, hired by the brother who stands to inherit. If this man dies here, the scandal won't be about gangsters. It will be about the integrity of Seoul National University Hospital." It was a bluff wrapped in a truth. Dr. Kim paled, her professional reputation suddenly on the line. She picked up the phone. "Security to the VIP wing now, and bring the head of internal medicine." The confrontation at Minyu's door was a standoff. June's guards faced off against hospital security. June arrived, spitting with rage. "This is a family matter. You have no jurisdiction." "This is a hospital," Dr. Kim fired back. "I have medical jurisdiction. This caregiver has presented evidence of potential foul play. The patient will be evaluated by our independent team. Now." In the chaos, Annika slipped back into the room. Minyu was awake, his eyes alert. The new doctor was frantically trying to disconnect the suspicious IV bag. Annika went straight to Minyu. "The USB. Where?" He nodded toward the bathroom, behind the mirror. She retrieved it, a small, black device no bigger than her thumb. She pocketed it just as the independent medical team swarmed in, pushing June and his doctor aside. But June wasn't looking at the doctors. He was looking at Annika. He saw the defiance in her stance, the lack of panic. He knew. She had gotten something. His eyes darted to the now-ajar bathroom door, to the mirrored cabinet. His face went slack with realization. He knew about the drive. The race was now a sprint. Annika had the drive. Soo Min had the digital key. They needed to connect them to activate Protocol White Jade. But June, knowing the financial failsafe was in play, would now escalate to outright violence. His dream of a seamless corporate takeover was evaporating. All that was left was brute force. As Annika was escorted from the room by a sympathetic nurse, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she knew it was June. It contained a single image. It was the front door of her mother's care facility in Decatur. Standing there clear as day were Minu's two watchers, and standing across the street facing them were two other men. The message was clear. June's people had found Minu's people. A stalemate in Atlanta, a ticking clock. The next move would be violent. And then the final text. You have the drive. Bring it to me at the docks in Inchin in 2 hours. Come alone. Or I call my men in Georgia and your mother becomes collateral damage in a war she doesn't understand. The bridge into Act 3 is set. Annika holds the physical key to destroy June's ambitions, but he holds a knife to the throat of the only person she loves. She must now move from the sterile world of hospital intrigue to the violent, shadowy world of the docks, where Minu's empire began, to make an impossible choice. Save her mother, or save a crime lord and bring down a dynasty. The docks of Inchin at night were a cathedral of shadows and steel. This was where the Park Empire began, with smuggling and blood. And it was here that Annika Carter, a trauma nurse from Atlanta, walked alone to meet a killer, a USB drive burning a hole in her pocket, and her mother's life hanging on a phone call 3,000 miles away. June stood under a solitary floodlight on Pier 9, surrounded by 4 men. He looked like a different person from the polished brother in the hospital. He was coiled, electric with desperation. The financial noose Minu had built was tightening. His allies were abandoning him. This was his last stand. You have something of mine, June called out, his voice echoing off the shipping containers. I have a choice, Annika replied, stopping 20 feet away. And so do you. Call off your men in Georgia. Let me walk away with my mother safe. You'll get the drive. June laughed, a hollow sound. You think this is a negotiation? You give me the drive, I might call them off. That's the deal. I need more than might, Annika said, her voice steady despite the terror screaming in her veins. You're not in a position to need anything, June snapped. He pulled out his phone, held it up. 1 tap, that's all it takes. Your mother has a lovely view of the garden from her room. It would be a shame to spoil it. He was right. She was outnumbered, outgunned. She had 1 card left to play, and it was the truth. The drive is useless to you, June. The protocol requires 2 keys. My part was just to get it to your niece, Sumin. She has the other half. She already knows everything about your father, about your brother, about the Prague firm. If you harm my mother or me, she activates everything. Your accounts freeze globally in under an hour. The triad in Macau you owe money to. They'll be the least of your problems. June's face contorted. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought the drive was the whole key. He thought Annika was the last piece. But Minu had outmaneuvered him, using the nurse as a decoy, while the real key was with the daughter he'd hidden away. The realization was a physical blow. He lowered the phone, his mind racing. Then why are you here? He whispered, furious and confused. For my mother, Annika said simply. And to give you a message from your brother. He said to tell you, the docks are where our father taught us loyalty. You should have learned the lesson. It was a trigger. June's eyes blazed. He gave a sharp nod to his men. 2 of them started toward Annika. This was it. Violence was his only language left. But then a new sound cut through the night, the low rumble of car engines. Headlights snapped on from between the container stacks, illuminating the pier. Doors opened. Figures emerged. At the front was Captain Siak, and beside him, leaning heavily on a cane but standing on his own 2 feet, was Park Minu. He was pale, dressed in a simple black coat over hospital clothes, but he was upright. He had discharged himself against all medical advice. The independent hospital team, seeing the proof of poisoning, had flushed his system with aggressive treatment. He had just enough strength to stand, and an ocean of will to see this through. June stared, his world crumbling. You're supposed to be dying. I was, Minu said, his voice weak but clear. Thanks to you, but it seems I have a good nurse. He looked at Annika, a nod of profound acknowledgement, then his gaze returned to his brother. It ends here, June. The way it started, just us. Minyu's men outnumbered June. The standoff was absolute. June's 4 men looked nervously at Siak and the dozen others. The loyalty had shifted. "You'll kill me," June challenged, a last flicker of defiance. "No," Minyu said, and the word held a terrifying finality. "I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live, but you will live with nothing. No name, no money, no family. The White Jade Protocol will see to that. The world will know you as the brother who poisoned his father and tried to murder his sibling for a fortune that will never be yours. You will be a ghost, and every enemy we ever made will be looking for you." He gestured to Siak. The old captain stepped forward and threw a passport and a thin envelope of cash at June's feet. "There's a cargo ship leaving for Manila in 1 hour. Be on it. If you are ever seen in Korea again, you will not leave alive." It was exile, a death sentence carried out slowly by poverty and hunted solitude. For a man like June, who craved power and recognition, it was a fate worse than a bullet. June looked at the passport, at the cash, at his brother's impassive face. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, shocked understanding. He had lost, completely. He picked up the envelope, pocketed the passport, and turned without another word. He walked past his confused men, past Annika, and disappeared into the maze of containers, a prince of crime reduced to a rat fleeing into the shadows. Minyu watched him go, then sagged against his cane. Siak moved to support him, but Minyu waved him off, his eyes finding Annika. "Is it done?" he asked her. Annika took out the burn phone and dialed Sumin. "It's done. He's gone." On the other end, Sumin let out a breath. "Protocol White Jade is activated. The data is released. The freezing orders begin at 9 a.m. Seoul time." She paused. "Is my father alive?" "He is," Annika said, looking at the frail, formidable man under the dock lights. Tell him I'll see him soon." The line went dead. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Minyu returned to the hospital, not as a prisoner, but as a patient recovering from a confirmed poisoning. The story that leaked to the press was a sanitized version. A business rival had attempted to poison the reclusive tycoon Park Minyu. His loyal private nurse had helped uncover the plot. The perpetrator had fled the country. The police, aware of the wider criminal implications, but also the immense economic fallout of a full-scale gang war, accepted the narrative. Sometimes, stability is the greater good. June's financial empire evaporated overnight. Assets frozen, deals collapsed. The Hong Kong triad, furious at being cheated, put a price on his head that would follow him to whatever back alley in Manila he crawled into. He became a non-person, exactly as Minyu had promised. For Annika, the resolution came in layers. Her mother was safe. Minyu's watchers in Atlanta had held the line, and with June's fall, the threat vanished. Her visa issues were smoothed over by Park Holdings, which formally hired her as a private medical consultant for the family. The deportation order vanished from the system. But the true surprise came 2 weeks later. Minyu, now convalescing in his penthouse, summoned her to his study. He was stronger, the color returning to his face. He pushed a document across the desk. It was a deed and a bank statement. "The apartment you were staying in is now in your name," he said. "The mortgage is paid. The bank account is for your mother's continued care. It is more than enough." Annika stared speechless. It was a fortune. "This is not payment," Minyu continued, as if reading her mind. "Payment was your salary. This is gratitude and an apology. I used you as a weapon in a war you didn't choose. You could have let me die. You chose to fight. You saved my life twice, once from the poison and once from my brother. My family does not forget such debts." He then slid a second, smaller item across the table. An airline ticket to Atlanta, first class, open return. "Go see your mother. Stay as long as you like. Your job will be here when you return, if you want it." The final, surprising detail wasn't in the money or the property. It was in the nature of the job itself. When Annika returned from Atlanta a month later, refreshed, her mother secure in a top-tier care facility, the dynamic had shifted. Minyu no longer treated her as staff. He consulted her. On business meetings, he'd ask, "What does your nurse's intuition say about this man?" He valued her perception, her calm under pressure, her ability to see the truth people tried to hide. She became less his employee and more his advisor, a trusted voice in a world of lies. And Sumin did come home. The daughter, now heiress to a legitimate, restructured Park Holdings, brought a new energy. She and Annika formed an unlikely friendship. Sumin saw in Annika the woman who had saved her father, the person who acted when others calculated. They were, in their own ways, both Minyu's unlikely saviors. The empire had changed forever, just as the Hook promised. Not through a bloody gang war, but through a financial scorched earth policy triggered by a whisper. Minyu began to dismantle the criminal side of his operations, laundering the family legacy into legitimate enterprise under Sumin's guidance. The CEO of crime was retiring, making way for a new generation. On a Tuesday evening, Annika was in the penthouse kitchen, not making jollof rice, but teaching the chef how to prepare a low-sodium version of tteokbokki that Minyu could actually eat. Minyu walked in, leaning less heavily on his cane. He watched her for a moment. "You know," he said, "when I woke up and heard that name in my ear, I thought it was a delusion, a nightmare." "It was the truth," Annika said, not turning from the stove. "It was a beginning," Minyu corrected softly. The story closes not with a bang, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. The monitor that flatlined now sits silent in a hospital storage room. The poison is a lab report in a locked file. The brother is a ghost story told on the docks. And the nurse who whispered one word is in a bright kitchen, in a city that is no longer a prison, watching over a man who is no longer just a patient, but a person whose future she helped secure. The consequences of that whisper rippled out, toppling a kingdom of shadows, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a fortune, but a moment of courage, spoken softly in the dark. So what remains of an empire built on silence after the truth is whispered? Not the structure itself, but the space it occupied. A space that can be filled with something new, something quieter, and perhaps something better. Park Minyu's story is a blueprint for downfall, but not the kind you usually see. It wasn't a rival syndicate that toppled him. It wasn't a police raid or a betrayal from a trusted captain. It was a fracture from within, propagated by a brother's greed, yes, but exposed by an outsider's conscience. The most secure fortresses are always breached from the inside, and the most dangerous weapon is often the one you never thought to classify as a threat, like a nurse's intuition, or a daughter's loyalty, or a single word spoken in the vulnerable space between life and death. We are drawn to stories of kingdoms and crime lords because they simplify power. They give it a face, a throne, a clear hierarchy. But real power is a web. It's in the silent transfers of money, in the unspoken agreements, in the fear that keeps people looking the other way. And the most fascinating stories aren't about the king on the throne, but about the unseen people in the web. The nurses, the accountants, the siblings, the drivers, who, by choice or by chance, find the one thread that, when pulled, makes the entire tapestry unravel. Annika Carter went a soul to pay a debt. She stayed to settle a moral one. She didn't bring down the Park Empire with a gun or a lawsuit. She did it with a whisper and then with the steadfast refusal to look away. In the end, the empire didn't fall, it transformed. The poison was purged. The betrayer was exiled. The heir returned. And the nurse, the outsider, became part of the foundation of whatever comes next. That might be the most subversive ending of all. Not destruction, but painful, deliberate change. It makes you wonder, in the vast, complex systems of power and influence that shape our world, corporate, political, social, how many other silent battles are being fought in hospital rooms and boardrooms? How many whispers are being swallowed by the beep of a monitor or the hum of an air conditioner? And what does it take for someone to finally lean close and speak the truth, knowing it might cost them everything. The story of the black nurse and the dying mafia boss is a thriller, a drama, a tale of revenge and redemption. But underneath all that, it's a reminder that the greatest shifts in history often hinge on the courage of a single person, standing in a room they were never supposed to be in, who decides that some lines are worth crossing and some truths are worth saying out loud. If you found yourself captivated by this story of hidden loyalties and quiet revolutions, there are countless more tales where the real drama unfolds not in the spotlight, but in the shadows just beside it. To uncover them with us, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.